and welcome to Soul Play. On today's episode, I am so excited to welcome a true force for feminine empowerment. Our guest today is Jaime Lauren, a somatic erotic practitioner, a holistic menstrual coach, and creator of transformational feminine embodiment journeys, and the founder of Cyclical Living for women. Jaime works with menstruating women who want to develop a deeper relationship with their feminine energy, manage their emotions rather than feeling like their emotions manage them, and cultivate balanced energy levels to avoid those highs and lows throughout the month. Jaime helps women fall in love with who they are and gain confidence in their body's wisdom so they trust their intuition, allowing them to create a life that is in full alignment for them. After many years of professional training, self-study, self-practice, and personal experiences, Jaime has guided hundreds of women to experience trust with their female body and open to more pleasure and aliveness. In this empowering discussion, Jaime centers around menstrual cycle awareness and the concept of inner seasons, which refers to the different phases of the menstrual cycle and how they correspond to seasons of the year. Jaime shares her perspective on how understanding and honoring these phases can lead to greater freedom and empowerment for women. The conversation touches on practical tips for navigating the premenstrual phase, reframing PMS as prioritize myself, and the importance of community and support in this journey of self-discovery and empowerment. Jaime also shares her personal journey of discovering menstrual cycle awareness and how it transformed her life, highlighting the challenges and rewards of embracing this holistic approach to health and well-being. And without further ado, I welcome Jaime Lauren. Welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Good to be here.
Yes. So at the top of the show, I would have introduced you to our listeners, but if you don't mind taking a moment to introduce yourself and let us know what Soul Play means to you.
So my name is Jaime Lauren, and I am a holistic menstrual coach and a fertility awareness educator. And we can talk more about what that means later, but let's think about soul play. What soul play means to me is freedom, accessing freedom within myself and facilitating other women to access freedom within themselves. This can be achieved through many different avenues, I'm sure. So something for me right now is like dance is really bringing me so close to those moments and pockets of freedom. But on a bigger scale, like a lifestyle scale, the thing that I use myself and facilitate for other women is just connecting to the menstrual cycle, connecting to our true nature, our cyclical living, so that we can find freedom in more than just a pocket of time.
Wonderful. I would love to dive into that with you. I've had the pleasure of getting to know you through a workshop that I attended over a year ago now about inner seasons. So if we could get on the topic of what that looks like and how you help others awaken freedom within themselves in our own natural way of being a woman.
Yeah. So before I go into what inner seasons is, I just feel to add a little bit of context. So firstly, we as female hormonal bodies have a menstrual cycle, or let's say menstruating humans, because obviously pre a certain age and post a certain age, we're not menstruating anymore. But when we're in those menstruating years, we are living with a cycle of hormones. And these hormones are incredibly powerful. They have a strong effect on our emotions, our physical, mental, and spiritual reality. So as these hormones change throughout one cycle, we are actually moving through almost 4 different humans in one cycle. And so what I love to do is help people understand how to navigate each of these phases in the cycle. But just to add on to that as well, that is not common education. We are not educated on our female bodies and understanding how this cycle has such a huge influence on us. And so what we are actually doing most of the time without even realizing is living in a masculine society cycle where a male hormonal body is actually in a 24-hour cycle and female body is 28-day cycle, roughly. So they're very different cycles. And society is running on this 24-hour. So we as women are then comparing ourselves against this society structure and against male hormonal bodies. And then we're like, well, this doesn't make sense. And we start blaming ourselves for stuff and feeling like we're lazy, or we don't have the motivation, or we don't have the discipline. And a nice, easy thing to think about is if there's times in your cycle that you're thriving and hitting the gym and you're meeting all the promises you've made to yourself, but then later in the cycle, you're like not wanting to get out of bed for the gym. You're blaming yourself, thinking, what's wrong with me? Why haven't I got any energy today? Why don't have I had the discipline to get up and do it? Where's my willpower? But actually, we're just living in a different hormonal body, and we haven't really grasped that through everyday life. So that's a lead into what is the inner seasons.
This resonates so much. Thank you for taking the time. And I think a lot of our listeners can probably relate heavily to this in this society that we live in that is mainly masculine and driven in a productive 9-to-5 status quo with high expectations to meet that. Whenever I hear you speak, I think of like myself as a girl transitioning into an adolescent, teenager, having lots of changes, not being guided really through those changes, and then coming into womanhood. It's very challenging and disheartening. And for me personally, I remember a lot of fear and some dissociation really from my own body, from my femininity, from my cycle, which I'm sure you come across a lot too.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. Often when I ask women something about their cycle or where are you in your cycle, they'll always, often, not always, often assume that I'm asking if they're bleeding or not, because that is about as much information as we're figured out about our cycle, is that we bleed. And that's the main event. But actually, even that is not true. So inner seasons helps us grasp easily the energetics of our cycle. So seasons being winter, spring, summer, autumn. Now, the time of menstruation, when we're bleeding, we liken this to the season of winter. So it's our inner winter. And this is because if you think about winter outside, it's cold. We spend more time indoors. Typically, our energy is a bit lower. We want to be a bit more snuggly with rugs and hot tea. And there's this desire to just be more solitude, more reflective and more reflection. And this is the similar energy to those couple of days before bleeding and that time of bleeding, where we feel our awareness is most within, we're more sensitive, and we crave more solitude and lower level activity. And we'll talk more about that probably shortly. But I get so excited. I could just keep going and talking about this season alone. But I'll move on to the next season, which is spring. Yeah. So spring is, you think about it as an external season. You've basically been hibernating in the winter, and then you look out the window and the sun has started to shine and the sky's bluer and the nights are starting to draw out again. And there's this like freshness after having the death through nature in the winter. And so this phase, the spring, we liken to our pre-ovulation, where one of our main hormones, estrogen, starts to rise. And this makes our physical energy levels rise, but also our mental outlook starts to be one of more positive and hopeful. And then we move more into the summer energy, where estrogen continues to rise. And this is when our energies are like reaching their highest level. And we can remember what it's like when it's summer outside, right? I'm English. The seasons are so extreme. I don't know about where you're from.
Canada, very extreme.
Right? Yeah, exactly. So it's summer outside. We're so excited to just be out and be socializing and be out in nature and to like use this energy that it's fueling us, the summer sun. And this again is the time of ovulation. So this is when, as a woman, we have our highest levels of energy and we are feeling more desirable in ourselves. Our libido is at its highest typically. We feel more confident and sensual and more resilient to life. And that one is an interesting one because that's the one that we kind of compare ourselves to. We're like, oh, what's wrong with me when I'm not her? Yeah. And then we fall into autumn after ovulation. This is the trickier phase that many women struggle with, this premenstrual phase. And this is like the time of autumn when the nights start drawing in again, the leaves are falling from the trees, and there's this natural desire to come back home. And this is the time of premenstruation. So this is, I think, one of the more complex season to talk to, because there's different phases within that as well. So this is the progesterone dominant phase. And progesterone in itself is actually to bring balance from the estrogen, and it's to relax us. It's actually a relaxing hormone. But what happens is we are in resistance to relaxing and slowing down. We want to keep going in our summer. And so that resistance is what brings a whole world of other emotions and physical experiences.
Yes. Wow. Yeah. I remember in this workshop that we did together, that was the season that was most identifiable. Of course, winter, as you mentioned, we're bleeding. It's, of course, we all know that season, but from a psychological perspective, this was always, historically anyway, a very challenging time for me. Difficult, a lot of inner critic, a lot of not good enough, a lot of struggle around that time for me historically.
Yeah.
What's going on there? Like,
Yeah.
it's not just psychologically. And I remember you had some practical tips that can empower women to actually step into their cycle rather than fighting it, and also striving for this constant summer, which is just impossible, right?
For sure. And this is the work of menstrual cycle awareness. I can give some tips, and I will for sure, but this is the work. Or the play. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
And like, I obviously love doing this. This is why I do it. So it is play. And that's what I want to reframe people's mindset on, because there is so much benefit and magic in each of our phases. And when we look at the premenstrual phase, wow, firstly, we have been told not to trust who we are in that phase. So if you're emotional, or if you're feeling frustrated or angry, or, typically a woman can go through all of the emotions in one day. I'm upset, I'm angry, I'm happy, I'm crying, I'm a mess. Yeah, I'm an emotional mess. Not really, but this is like what we're telling ourselves. But this is a response from just not really understanding or giving ourselves permission to work with our energy and our emotions. And I find that this layer that we get put on by society of, oh, you must be premenstrual, you're being emotional, is so degrading, because there's actually so much truth in a lot of what we're feeling and seeing. And I think we had 2 hours on this topic. So I'm always a bit careful to make bold statements without having the context underneath, because discernment is obviously important here. But if you're hating your job every single pre-menstrual cycle, that time before bleeding, every time you're like, why am I doing this job? There's probably some truth that you don't want to be doing that job. It's the gold, but instead we're told it's don't listen to yourself. So the messages of the things that are upsetting or triggering or coming through is not to be dismissed, is actually to be looked at and assessed throughout the next cycle. Like, is this true? Does this have some information for me? Is this job the wrong job for me? Is this relationship serving me anymore? Is this friendship in alignment? Am my needs being met? Am I communicating well enough? Like, there's so much information that can be found in here. And I call it finding your gold in your premenstrual phase. So this is one of the things that is, okay, I'm having a lot of inner critic, is another thing where it comes back to the fact that the hormones are dropping before we bleed. So we're entering more of the void, and everything within us becomes more transparent. And it's easier to see our shadows and our fears and our pain. And this can be seen as like something I don't want, and let's just like Netflix it out and eat a load of chocolate and drink some wine and everything will be okay. And that is one sure tactic.
But it comes knocking next month, yeah?
It comes knocking next month. And then if you don't look at that, fast forward 20, 30 years when you're going into menopause, that is the phase of menopause. So all that stuff, if you don't look at it now, will come hitting you hard for a few years. So this is the preparation. This is the play to do now to see what is in alignment and not, and start to shift these things so that when you get to your mid-50s, you're not faced with everything you've denied for your whole life.
Wow. If that isn't motivation enough, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. What a powerful statement. And with anything else, I mean, now is the time.
Yeah.
Right. For all of these, although difficult, and jumping into a basket of unknown, because if you lean into these emotions, then of course it's scary.
Yeah.
But it's also, what's the alternative? And in this case, an unpleasant one. I think of, the future a couple decades from now. I hope to be at peace with some or all of these things, right? Like, rather than really having no choice but to be faced with it at the time. I would say I didn't know that autumn phase is kind of your baseline postmenopausal, right?
It's not postmenopausal, it's the process of menopause.
Okay, thank you.
So it's those 3 to 5 years that women are going through, where their cycles are starting to drop and they're shortening, and then they're disappearing, and then maybe they come every 3 months, and then they come every 6 months, and then they're like, okay, finally I had my last period done. But that whole process is an initiation in itself, and everything that you've been denying comes to the surface.
So it's really imperative that we touch on these things. A big theme that I've been talking about through this podcast is we're not alone. That's daunting to me. I talk about it with friends and family. It's scary, but coming together in community, being connected to others where there's a safe space where you can talk about these things. I remember it being such a weight lifted in my own personal life when I was acknowledged for these inner critics that were always higher in my premenstrual phase, and also using this language and describing it in ways that it's something that we can overcome, rather than it being this disempowering reality that, like you mentioned, is often shamed, or women feel guilty for, or use it actually as not even consciously, but as an excuse, right? Like, oh, just premenstrual. Yeah, it's just this, it's just that. It's okay. We can lean into these things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Is there anything else that you'd like to offer on autumn or the other seasons?
Yeah. So let's just wrap that up as one takeaway action could be to, when you're in your premenstrual phase and let's say something bothers you, upsets you, irritates you, a loud voice is criticizing you about something, have a journal and take note of those things that are coming up. And then the next cycle, when you're in that phase again, jot those things down again. And then again, the next cycle, and then start to see if there's any patterns. And if there's patterns, there's your gold. That's what you want to be looking at and navigating.
Wonderful practical tip. Because sometimes people can feel lost and overwhelmed, right? Like, where do I go from here? So I appreciate the guidance.
Yeah.
Wow. And in your work, is this what you help women with? Really explore these shadows and going through the caves to find this gold? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And how to then navigate that, and the feels, how you allow yourself to feel what is there. And that's when we start to get into the nervous system support and the somatic therapy support. Now, there's one more thing I wanted to share on PMS, and I remember you loved this actually. It's reframing premenstrual syndrome to prioritize myself.
I'm like dancing around the mic right now. Yes, yes, yes. Tell us all about it.
Yeah. So this is a really beautiful reframe, because there is no better time than this phase in the cycle to prioritize oneself, which means having stronger boundaries, being clear on your needs and doing the best that you can to meet them, and taking more time for you, more solitude, more time for self-care practices. Self-care practices can look like having a nice hot bath, sure, but it can also come into okay, I'm going to ask if my partner can cook me dinner tonight, or I'm going to tell my boss, no, I can't actually go to that event tonight. Like, prioritizing me. What is it that I need? And that is a practice for sure. But I promise it gets easier. Every time you see your need was met or your no was acknowledged, you're like, what? I could have done that.
world didn't end, contrary to popular belief. It's terrifying, though.
Yeah,
Thank you for acknowledging that. It's very scary. But like anything else, the more we do it, it becomes habitual
Yeah.
and then reinforced. You spoke about the nervous system earlier. We're also reinforcing a positive outcome whenever you do something that is terrifying.
Yeah.
To really teach ourselves that it's okay. It's a story that is leading us to think that it's terrifying or that there's major consequences, when in fact, putting points in the direction of, I chose me. I chose me. I sat with my own truth. I acknowledged it and saw it, and I'm acting in the direction that supports my own needs. And that's another something that I think people in general, including myself, struggle to do. But again, it's a process, and you're not alone. We've got this, right? Yeah.
And that is where I feel empowerment, when I'm like, oh, wow, I just honored myself and everything's okay. And that person still loves me.
And I love myself more,
And I love
because
myself.
I actually am treating myself like I matter.
Yeah.
It's so silly, actually, how historically, especially, I've been so quick to put everyone else's needs first, people please, accommodate. And it's almost like I can do anything for someone else. And then reversing that, it's been an ongoing journey for me. And it has gotten a lot easier. It's quite unrecognizable from where I've come. And I'm really pleased with that. But it's just so wild how designed we are to cater to other people. And if we can really turn that inwards, even a fraction to begin with, I think we can create a more wholesome world. So what has your own personal journey been like? How did this come about for you?
Wow, it's a good question. So it really, it's quite like there's so much. It's not one thing. It kind of came to me from various directions. The things that were ruminating was, I was a full-time yoga teacher and practitioner of 10 years. It was my dedicated path. And for some time, I really felt like something was missing when I was showing up to my mat, for like probably a year. And I was in resistance to that. I was like, no, yoga is my way. And I was like, actually, something isn't feeling met here. And so I started to become aware that it was my feminine part of the body, let's say, like my breast and my womb, that I was acknowledging and bringing awareness to all parts of my body, but these areas. And so when I started to hone in on this, other things started coming to me. And that's when I was like, oh my gosh, I'm paying attention to my womb. And I have a IUD in my womb, which is a hormonal device as a method of birth control. And all of a sudden that was like, that's wrong. I don't want that in my body. My body was like, expel. So I started going down a rabbit hole with this, and I decided to remove that. And then I was searching for a natural birth control method. And that's how I then came across the fertility awareness method, which is something I teach. And this was like groundbreaking and world shifting and mind altering stuff. And I was just like, I have to share this. And at the same time, the menstrual cycle awareness started coming to me through Alexandra Pope, who coined the term menstrual cycle awareness and the inner seasons. And literally my whole world just felt changed by these two pieces coming at me. And I just felt instantly like I had dropped a weight from my body. Like I was carrying so much on my shoulders of heaviness, of beliefs, of like who I was supposed to be. And then all of a sudden I read this material and I was like, it just fell off me. And I'm like, I am someone I didn't even know I was allowed to be. And I gained so much permission and freedom in that moment. And that's when I was like, I have to share this with the world. I have to. And I was fully supported in that. Like magic happened from that moment.
And it does when you're fulfilling your purpose and things really sound like they align beautifully. And it's so incredible when you're met with such magic and gold and such a transformational experience for yourself that, of course, there's so much benefit in spreading that, right? And I think that's one of the driving forces of this podcast, is knowing people like you who are so devoted and passionate towards their work, because it allows people to be liberated. And back to the beginning of our conversation about freedom, what are we here to do? Yeah, hopefully play, explore the depths. And play can mean work too. It's okay. It's interchangeable. I think it's seeing what is and removing that dual aspect of good and bad, black and white, this and that. It just is. And I imagine a lot of this work was challenging for you too. Could you speak to some of the challenges that you've met both personally in providing this form of care to women?
I would say one of the greatest challenges. Okay, there's two things that are coming to mind. So, one, I would say this first because we've kind of already touched on it, but it was the premenstrual time when I really allowed myself to slow down and start seeing the things that were coming up. So, before, I think I was just denying or not even aware that it was cycle related. And then all of a sudden I become aware and I'm like, oh, there's a lot of stuff here. And what I noticed is it's the stuff that's always there, but it's highlighted in this moment. So something that it still feels a vulnerable topic for me to share, but it took me maybe 6 months, so 6 cycles of repeatedly seeing that what at the time I just thought was my jealousy was coming up. So I started having like extreme jealousy during this phase in my cycle with my partner and anything really. It was really highlighted and I hadn't become aware of that before. And I just dismissed it and excused it as something. But all of a sudden I had this information. And I was like, wow, I have an opportunity to look at this now. And that was one of the most painful things I did, but it's also one of the most freeing things that I have ever moved through, realizing that that was my abandonment wound from my childhood that I'd never even knew existed. And then I got to work through that. And now that is healed and jealousy is no longer a part of my everyday life. Of course, jealousy is a normal emotion that we can tap into, but the intensity and the debilitation that it would bring to me back then when it was so much deeper is no longer there. So that is what I mean by finding the gold. We can see and then we can play with it and then we can liberate from that.
Thank you so much for sharing so vulnerably. And it's another beautiful representation of human struggle and shadows. It's just universal. And the sooner we can lean into this reality and see it and feel it and acknowledge it and explore it, and like you said, play with it, the sooner we can step outside of it and really be free. Wow. Thank you. What was the other thing you were saying?
The other one, which is the menstruation time, what idea is we slow down. And even if it's in our possibilities, which I do believe, no matter what lifestyle you're living, we can find a way to reduce what we have to do in a day. We can find a way to drop some of that. Sometimes that takes preparation, but it's possible. And so as a facilitator of this work, I wanted to explore it to its depth. And I would put myself in 3-day retreats when I'm bleeding, and I could find the beauty in that. And I was also, again, confronted with how hard it was just to be.
And not do.
How hard it was to see, not even to do, but to see how many times my instinct wanted to reach for my phone.
Sure.
How many times I would allow myself to race off in thoughts and feel the urgency of things that I forgot to do. And this is everyday life. There's something that's really ruminating with me at the moment, which is realizing that we're not here to do at the end of our last moments. So we're going to think, damn, I forgot to do this. You're not going to it's not why we're here. I really think we're here to play. I really think we're here to have pleasure and to enjoy life.
And connect.
And to connect. Like it's not about what we're achieving, what we're doing. And this is what menstrual cycle awareness has also highlighted. I knew it, but this is the practice of it. So the practice of coming more into being. And that is why I then also supplemented my work with nervous system management. Because if we're in fight or flight or we're in survival mode, we struggle, no matter how much we meditate, we struggle to actually find inner peace and to feel safe to just sit still and do nothing. If our nervous system's like, do something. And, so this really, it all fits. It's never just one tool, there's always
layers. Yeah, multi-layered. And I think it's very wise too, because by playing with our nervous system and learning our nervous system in these different states of fight, flight, freeze, how do we work with this, right? How then can your clients go home, and if they're not aware of not only according to their menstrual cycle where they're at, but even their nervous system in that moment if they had a trigger 5 minutes previously or were a bit dissociated because a big emotion came up. I think it's quite empowering in general to have this wisdom because we are humans. We have bodies with nervous systems, and the sooner we can get to know them, the sooner we can dance with that.
Totally.
So you work with nervous system with your clients alongside of menstrual coaching.
Exactly. It's essential. And then the third piece is somatic. So, okay, I've regulated my nervous system to some degree. I'm bleeding and I'm trying to relax and be. And now I'm feeling all those things I was running away from. This is tough. And then that's when the somatics comes in. So how you can feel safe to be with what is showing up right now. And I'm conscious as we're talking about all of this, that if this is new to you, it might be like, well, that sounds really hard. And to some degree it is, but I cannot put into words the freedom and liberation that comes from the other side.
Yes. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but anything worth doing oftentimes is challenging at the beginning, right? You want to learn an instrument.
Yeah.
Oh, what? You can't play solos immediately? Of course you can. Everything takes time. It's just we forget about it in an environment and society that is instant gratification and thinking that we can achieve things overnight or order this or get that. It's not reality. So coming back to the process and enjoying the journey, which involves meeting ourselves and it is difficult and that's okay.
Yeah, for sure. And sometimes it's not even that hard. Like this is what I also want to remind people is that we have this idea that it will be hard. And sometimes in some parts it will, and sometimes it's actually not. And sometimes feeling the feelings, feeling the sensations, and then finding peace within them, that's basically the art of surrender. And once you've tapped into the art of surrender, everything in life is sweet. Yeah. So I've just got like visions in my mind, like how everything is just so deeply connected and intertwined, and one thing gets easier here, and then that unlocks this, and it unlocks that, and then all of a sudden you're just living your best life ever.
Yes to this. We can and we will. Lean into it all. Wow. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to express all of this. If I can share a bit of a personal story for me and see if this is a common theme amongst some of your clients, perhaps something that's very common in the world is this kind of go-getter, do. When I was living in Canada in Toronto, I was a labor and delivery nurse and seeing friends doing this. Yes, I was a yes woman. I can and I will, and I'll go out. And in terms of self-care, it was little to nothing. And at that time, I had extremely irregular periods. I'm talking like 4 times a year. When I would go to my doctor, oh yeah, you only need 4 a year to be fertile. I was like, well, this does not sound right, but you're a doctor. This mentality of like, okay, maybe we can let this slide a little bit longer. And in hindsight now, in my own personal story, I associate that deeply with stress and dissociating from my body, I think too. And being a people pleaser, being accommodating, like just certain personality traits that weren't serving me or that allowed me to maintain this lifestyle of being an energizer bunny. So do you happen to see this with women, these really busy, intense, high stress lifestyles, and then an unhappy body or like physical symptoms? You know, it's one thing to sit in it if we're regulating our nervous system and we're handed all these tools, but if we just keep ignoring it, like what happens then?
You know that common thing, burnout?
Ooh, I think I've heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Around the time I left Toronto, I think I was also experiencing such things.
Exactly. I think I've had a few myself in my old world. Yeah. So our body is constantly talking to us. And it might talk to a woman with painful periods. And you think, well, this is inconvenient. Now I've got to take a pill and then carry on doing and just have a second coffee to power through the day. And then it might start to feel more painful. And then maybe the PMS symptoms, the sore breast, the back pain, the headaches are starting to get worse. All of these are the ways that the body communicates and says, hey, something is up with my body. Can you look at this?
Red flag, red flag.
Red flag.
Yeah,
exactly. And so these things have become normalized. So typically women just think, well, that's part of being a woman. No, like.
And that's where I was at. And granted, it's okay for those who are listening. Please remember, like, it's wherever we are, it's okay.
Yeah, for sure. Like, it's no one's fault that we haven't received this education to understand what is normal, what is healthy, what am I supposed to experience versus what am I supposed to put up with. And no woman should have to put up with these things. And these, as I said, are messages from the body saying something's up. And these things usually come from like stress. Stress is a huge implication on the female hormonal system and the cycle.
With cortisol, is it related?
It is related. So basically, as a woman, we can only produce so much cortisol.
Which is the stress hormone for listeners.
Exactly. And then basically, once you've depleted our store of cortisol, it then eats into one of the two main reproductive hormones, progesterone. So it literally turns it into more cortisol. So it's depleting the levels of progesterone, which, remember, I said is the one that relaxes you.
Yeah, wow.
So now you're
jacked on a stress hormone.
You're jacked on a stress hormone, not getting the benefits of a relaxation hormone. Plus, that means that your estrogen is now excess dominant. So then you probably got the symptoms of excess, which is like the premenstrual syndrome symptoms, the period pains, the breast, the headaches, etc. So this is how the hormones can start to imbalance, is stress for sure. Another one is diet, what we're putting in our body and what we're not putting in our body.
Sure. Care to elaborate on that?
Yeah. So things like if we're eating a lot of sugar and gluten and drinking alcohol, like, I don't want to put frequencies or numbers on this, but this is the sort of thing that will create inflammation in the body. Dairy is another. Gluten and dairy, sugar and alcohol are big culprits. And caffeine. Yes, that wonderful coffee that we love. And then on the flip side of the things that you're not putting in the body. So obviously our endocrine system and all of the systems in our body need certain nutrients to function effectively. So if we're not getting all those good vitamins and minerals, then this can also have an implication on our hormones. So emotions is another big one. Dissociation, disconnection, pushing past our energy reserves. And then, of course, at some point, if we're not listening to these signs and we keep pushing, the body will win. It will either have a burnout, it will make you sick, or it will manifest in your subconscious mind creating an accident where you, I don't know, break a leg and you end up in bed for 3-4 weeks, something.
Slow down, go inward.
So it does catch up. And for sure, I've worked with clients that have come to me because they're like, I'm tired of burning out. And I'm like, I hear you, sister. You ready to do work? You ready?
Get into it.
Yeah, exactly. And I have experienced that firsthand from my corporate days in the city in London. So
haven't we all? Wow. Would you be open to sharing a success story of one of your clients, like using an example of amalgamating perhaps some things that we talked about already, but really shedding some light on an example of where someone can be and where they can go to?
Yeah.
With your work.
A woman that comes to mind was a yoga teacher in Australia, and she was feeling super disconnected from her body, which you would think that's strange. She's a yoga teacher, right? But it actually resonates very much from my own story too. She had a implant. It's a rod, that birth control that goes in the arm. She was feeling confused and basically just disconnected and not sure why. She was living this holistic lifestyle, thinking she's doing everything right. First thing we did was obviously get rid of the birth control device, because for those listening that aren't familiar, when we take birth control, it shuts the cycle off. It stops this hormone production. So we then are in a constant unchanging state, and this can lead to side effects like depression and anxiety and a sense of numbness. So this was the first thing we did. And then we started to connect her to the rhythm of the cycle. So we call this cyclical living, looking at her exercise. So she was powering in her vinyasa, solid, strong practice every single day. But the way that we work with our hormones is we slow down to like a yin or restorative yoga or some walking, or even just complete rest when we're bleeding. And then slowly start to bring in some softer movements as we go through into spring. And as the energy starts to increase, then she was going into like the vinyasa, the stronger practices, and really thriving and enjoying this. And then slowing down into a more like hatha-based practice in her autumn. And this is the more strength-based practice. And this is one very simple practice that we integrated with others that I will share. But the importance of this is, again, when we over-exercise, which we're not taught of because we're just taught the way that men should exercise. That's what our baseline is, the way that we think we should exercise, same every day or 3 times a week, blah, 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 blah. So when you start to understand how to work with the female hormones, we stop over-exercising, which is creating more cortisol and stress. So actually, we think we're doing good for our body, we're doing harm. So that impacts our hormones. Yeah, so this was one of the things. We looked at her exercise. We looked at her diet. We looked at the way that she was running her business. So making sure that most of her teaching is happening in her spring, autumn, and then she slowed down around winter and autumn. Yeah, which is a luxurious thing that she could do. I mean, to some people that's super luxurious and we don't have that. If you're in a city job, like you don't have that. But what I would encourage is starting to look at your social engagements. Yeah. So not planning lots of stuff in your winter and autumn and packing your fun in spring and summer when you've got the energy and the desire to do this. And then nervous system, we didn't need to work with on this woman, but it was something that I've recently just worked with on another woman. And it was completely game changing for her because she didn't realize how much she had been dissociating in her everyday life. And dissociation and relaxation can seem similar to someone that spends a lot of time dissociating. And I bring this up in this because as a yoga practitioner, I see a lot of people dissociating in their practice. And they think they're walking out relaxed, but they've actually just left their body during the practice to stay in all, like to meet all the shapes and sizes and
The stories
and the stories. And
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, yeah, it's common and it's an interesting one to take time to observe.
And to admit, I imagine, like for me too, historically, when I was burnt out and realized the level of dissociation, it's a really hard thing to admit to myself or to anyone, especially this iconic image of a yoga teacher and like these stories and identities that are presumed to be upheld. They are people after all, right? We're all just people, and we're all people that weren't given the baton of knowledge and wisdom that you're expressing so heavily here. It's okay that we didn't know, but it's really so beautiful whenever we can take this wisdom and apply it to our lives.
Yeah, this is some of the like the tangible, like practical things you could grasp the kind of work that we do together. But by the end of it, she says this has literally impacted every area of her life and starting to organize her whole life based on her cycle. Like she said that she was going away with her boyfriend for the weekend and she organized it at a certain point in her cycle where she knew that she could go and have fun and she would enjoy rather than like randomly organizing it and then like, oh, I'm on my period this weekend and just not really feeling like that's what the thing they want to do. So yeah, the empowerment and the freedom to work with her energy rather than against.
So empowering, so beautiful to talk about all these accessible ways of living. Knowledge is power. It's really transformed my life. I will say that. And I thank you and thank all the women who are doing this work for women to be able to actually just reclaim their birthright. We've talked about this in the past. I mean, ultimately, this is all so crucial and amazing, but it's also part of our history. Women know this. We've been so disconnected from ourselves, from others, from the earth. You know, we really just have to come more inward. And with these wisdoms and a community of like-minded women too, it's really something. We're coming close to a close here. I'm wondering if there's anything like a message, an idea, a thought that you would like to leave with the listeners today.
Yeah, it's more like a caveat, really, because we've shared a lot of information today. And I would like to deliver the message that wherever you are is absolutely perfect. And by no means should you come to the end of this podcast and think, I've got so much to do and I need to do this, that, and the other now. Because only if this motivates and sparks something in you do you move forward in that direction, not because you want to fix yourself or you think you're not good enough as you are right now. And this is so, so important because the whole point of all of this is to realize that you are enough and you are amazing, exactly who you are.
Thank you. It's such a beautiful reminder. Yeah. Again, with this soul play, you know, it's like healing is a big word right now. But I think if we can recoin it to remembering our power, remembering our essence, remembering our truth, remembering our nature, This is our nature. And it was so empowering to work with you, Jaime, because historically I looked at when I got my period, it was a burden and something that was inconvenient. And I know there were tendencies to dissociate in that realm too for me. And I think the change now is even, I welcome it. It's beautiful. And welcoming all of this cycle because it is us. So whenever we can lean into all of these different seasons that are happening naturally, we can see the strength and power in our beings. And I think that will recreate a stronger relationship with self so that we can actually genuinely learn to love ourselves, which is really the only way of loving another. And then as it ripples out, of course, then to loving the earth, plants, etc. We need this. We need this. Thank you for your wisdom. Where can people find you, Jaime?
That's a good question. So my website, cyclicalliving.co, and my IG handle, Cyclical Living for Women, with full stops between, but I'm sure you'll put them all underneath.
I will put them in the show notes for sure. Yeah. Thanks again for all that you do. I appreciate your work and the play that you're bringing to all the women.
Thank you.
That's it for today. Thank you for listening. I truly hope that today's conversation was valuable to you. To learn more about today's guests, including links and resources related to everything discussed today, visit the episode page at soulplaycollective.com. I'm so grateful you're here, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on the show. So don't be shy. Send in your comments and let us know how each episode is resonating with you. If you'd like to support the podcast, the easiest and most impactful thing you can do is to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on YouTube, and leave a review and/or comment. Sharing the show or your favorite episodes with friends or on social media is fantastic and super appreciated. And finally, for podcast updates, please follow us on Instagram at soulplay.collective and at Soulplay Collective on Facebook and YouTube. Appreciate the love and support. See you back here soon.